All stories are dramatized recreations. Named locations are fictionalized. Any resemblance to real persons is coincidental.
Harper, warehouse worker. The first thing I burned was the ugly Christmas sweater. The one with the sequined reindeer he'd worn just last night, his laughter a little too loud, his eyes a little too bright, avoiding mine over the glow of the fireplace. The synthetic fabric caught quickly, melting into a black, bubbling mess that smelled like a chemical landfill and forgotten promises. I watched the reindeer's red nose contort, then vanish into the orange heart of the flames. It was 10 a.m. on Christmas Day, and I was systematically incinerating my husband's life in our backyard fire pit. The cold California air bit at my cheeks, a stark contrast to the wall of heat pulsing from the iron bowl. To my left was a growing pile of his things, methodically pulled from his side of the closet, from his drawers, from the garage. To my right, our twin daughters' faces were pressed against the glass of the kitchen window, their expressions a mosaic of confusion and fear. I couldn't deal with that yet. First, I had to burn. It had started with the cologne, a new one, sharp and musky, something he'd started wearing a month ago. A change, he'd said with a shrug when I'd asked, not meeting my eyes. Daniel, my Daniel of 12 years, a man whose idea of a daring scent was Old Spice deodorant, suddenly smelled like a stranger. I'd filed it away, a tiny, jagged shard of unease in the comfortable fabric of our life. Then came the Christmas morning. The girls, Lily and Rose, were a whirlwind of shredded wrapping paper and delighted shrieks. The living room was a riot of color, a testament to the life we'd built. Daniel, in his reindeer sweater, played the jovial dad, handing out presents with a booming ho ho ho. That felt rehearsed. My gift from him was under the tree, a practical beige cardigan. Sensible, like me. Harper, the reliable one. Harper, who managed the returns desk at the Amazon warehouse, processing the discarded dreams of others all day, only to come home and, well, manage. My gift to him was a new, high-end thermos. His old one was dented, the logo faded from countless shifts spent driving his delivery van for the same company I worked for. It was a gift of care, of routine. He'd opened it, smiled a tight smile, and said, "Thanks, hun. You shouldn't have, but I should have. I should have looked closer. I should have listened to the silence that had grown between us, a silence I'd mistaken for comfort." The moment of discovery was so mundane, so brutally ordinary, it felt like a personal insult from the universe. I was gathering the discarded wrapping paper into a giant trash bag, my back aching from a long week on my feet. A small, flat box, elegantly wrapped in silver paper with a blood-red bow, had gotten wedged behind the sofa. It wasn't from any of us. My name wasn't on it. My heart did a slow, painful roll in my chest. "Daniel," I called out, my voice deceptively calm. "What's this?" He was on the floor, helping Rose assemble a Lego castle. He looked up and I saw it, the blood draining from his face. The sheer, unadulterated panic in his eyes. It was a flash, quickly masked, but it was enough. It was everything. "Must have gotten misplaced," he said, his voice too casual. "Probably for Mom. I'll take care of it." He started to get up, but I was faster. My fingers, numb from something deeper than the cold, tore at the silver paper. Inside was a black velvet box. And inside that, nestled in white satin, was a pair of diamond stud earrings. They were beautiful, elegant, nothing like the beige cardigan. And there was a card. A small, simple card. In a handwriting I didn't recognize, fluid and feminine, it read, "To my little miracle. Can't wait for tonight. All my love always." The world didn't shatter. It crystallized. Every late night, every sudden team meeting. Every time he'd hidden his phone's screen, every whiff of that new, alien cologne, it all snapped into a perfect, horrifying picture. The puzzle pieces I'd been ignoring assembled themselves into a guillotine. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I looked at Daniel, at the sheer terror on his face, and I felt nothing. A vast, icy nothing. "Harper, please, let me explain," he whispered, his voice cracking. I looked at the earrings, then at the beige cardigan. I was the returns desk. I was where unwanted things ended up. The metaphor was so perfect it was cruel. "Who is she?" My voice was flat, a dead thing. He swallowed, his eyes darting towards the girls who had fallen silent, sensing the seismic shift in the room. It's Jessica, from the sorting facility." "A colleague, of course." The world of Amazon was our entire world. He drove the packages, I processed their rejections, and he'd found his own little diversion within the same corporate ecosystem. I turned and walked away. I walked through our home, through the ghost of our life, and I went to the garage. I got the fire pit going. I went to his closet and I started pulling. The reindeer sweater was first, then the shirt he'd worn on our anniversary, the jacket he'd had since college. I made trip after trip, building a pyre of our shared history. He followed me, pleading, his words bouncing off the frozen shell I had become. It was a mistake. It didn't mean anything. Harper, think of the girls. I threw a stack of his favorite vinyl records onto the fire. The vinyl warped and melted with a sickening hiss. Think of the girls. I was thinking of teaching them that they are not a returns desk. That they should never, ever accept a beige cardigan when someone else is getting diamonds. The final item I brought out was the new thermos. I held it in my hands, the shiny metal cool against my skin. He watched, his eyes wide. Harper, no, that was from you. I looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time that morning. I saw the man I'd loved, the father of my children, and I saw a stranger. The connection was severed. I threw the thermos into the fire. It wasn't a dramatic, angry throw. It was a release, a final, symbolic return to sender. The flames licked at it, blackening the steel. I turned my back on the heat, on him, and walked towards the house. Towards my daughter's frightened faces pressed against the glass. The cold air no longer felt biting. It felt clean. It was the first day of the rest of my life, and it began with the scent of burning. The warehouse was a cathedral of noise and forgotten intentions. 1,000,000 square feet of echoing clatters, the hiss of pneumatic doors, and the constant, low hum of fluorescent lights bleaching the color out of everything. This was my kingdom, the returns desk. The place where hope came to die, or at least to be assessed for resale value. Day one after the burning. The world outside had shifted on its axis, but here, nothing had changed. The relentless conveyor belt of regret continued to roll, and I was its priestess. My body was on autopilot. Scan, assess, categorize, item not as described. Changed mind. Received as gift. My fingers, chapped from the cold air and cardboard, moved with a muscle memory that required no conscious thought. It was a blessing. If I focused on the monotony, I didn't have to focus on the hollowed-out cavern where my heart used to be. I didn't have to see the image of Lily and Rose's faces, pale and confused, as their father had hastily packed a bag that morning, his own movements frantic and clumsy. "Harper, you alive in there?" Mark, my shift supervisor, leaned on the counter, his bulk blocking my view of the endless line of totes. He was a kind man in his 50s, with a weary face that had seen 1,000 dramas unfold in this concrete jungle. "Barely," I said, forcing a smile that felt like a crack in dry earth. "Just the Monday after Christmas rush, the great holiday hangover." He nodded, but his eyes, sharp and knowing, didn't leave my face. "Rough one. You look like you didn't sleep." I slept on the couch, listening for the sound of his van in the driveway, a confusing mix of hope and dread twisting in my gut. He never came. "Something like that," I mumbled, focusing on a returned, as seen on TV, vegetable chopper. The box was pristine. Someone had clearly used it once, decided it wasn't for them, and repackaged it with meticulous care. I felt a strange kinship with the chopper. The day dragged on. Every blue vest, every rumble of a forklift in the distance, sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. Was it him? Had Daniel come to talk, to explain, to beg? The rational part of my brain knew he was on his route, probably delivering packages to happy, intact families. But the animal part of me, the wounded creature, was on high alert. My phone, face up on the counter, was a silent monument to the collapse. A dozen missed calls from Daniel. A flurry of texts that progressed from pleading, "Please, we need to talk for the girls," to defensive, "You can't just shut me out," to angry, "You burned my stuff." My grandfather's records. I read them all with a detached curiosity, as if they were meant for someone else. I hadn't responded. What was there to say? The fire had said it all. During my lunch break, I hid in the break room, a soulless cube with sticky tables and a microwave that smelled of burnt popcorn. I scrolled through my photos, past 1,000 images of a life that now felt like a lie. There we were at the company picnic last summer. Daniel, laughing, his arms slung around me. And there, in the background of one photo, was a woman with a bright, familiar smile. Jessica, from the sorting facility. She was in the crowd, holding a paper plate, looking directly at the camera. At him. How long had this been going on? The question was a worm burrowing deeper. A text from my mom lit up the screen. The girls are okay. Confused, but okay. They miss you. We all love you. A fresh wave of guilt and shame washed over me. I was the rock, the dependable one, and I had let a pair of diamond earrings reduce me to a backyard arsonist. I shoved the phone away and pulled out a small, cheap notebook I'd bought at the gas station on the way to work. The blank page stared back at me, intimidating and full of possibility. Writing a novel. It had been a random selection from the list of self-improvement options, a thing I'd once dreamed of in a life before twins and mortgages and beige cardigans. It felt absurd, sitting here in the Amazon break room, surrounded by the detritus of other people's lives, to think I could create something. But what else did I have? The returns desk was a metaphor for my existence. I was the end of the line for broken things. I needed to become the beginning of something. I uncapped my pen. The words didn't come. Instead, a single hot tear splashed onto the page, blurring the blue lines. I was so tired. The kind of tired that sleep couldn't fix. It was a fatigue of the soul. The afternoon shift was worse. The noise felt louder, the lights harsher. A package came down the line, a returned item from a delivery driver. The shipping label was from Daniel's Root. My breath hitched. It was a book, The 5 Love Languages. The irony was so thick I could taste it, metallic and bitter. I processed it mechanically. Reason for return, not needed. As I was about to drop it into the resell bin, a small, folded piece of paper fluttered out from between the pages. It was a receipt, not for the book. It was from a boutique hotel in Santa Barbara, dated 2 months ago. A charge for a single night. Room service. Champagne. The world narrowed to that slip of paper. The noise of the warehouse faded into a distant roar. I saw it all with terrifying clarity. A business trip he'd said he had to take. The new cologne. The night he'd come back smelling of salt air and lies. This was the mini-climax, the quiet, devastating explosion in the heart of the machine. It wasn't about the earrings anymore. It was about the premeditation, the hotel room, the champagne. This wasn't a mistake, it was a project. I didn't cry, I didn't rage. I carefully, deliberately folded the receipt and tucked it into the pocket of my vest, right over my heart. It was a cold, hard data point. Evidence. At that moment, Mark's voice crackled over the intercom. Harper, line 1. It's your husband. The sound of his title, now a lie, echoed in the vast space. My colleagues nearby paused, their curiosity a physical pressure. They knew. The gossip mill at Amazon was more efficient than its logistics network. I looked at the phone on the wall, its red light blinking like a warning beacon. I looked at the conveyor belt, still moving, an eternal river of other people's discarded things. I thought of the receipt in my pocket, a tiny shard of truth in a mountain of deceit. I picked up the notebook. I ignored the blinking light, and I wrote my first sentence. It wasn't the beginning of a novel. It was a declaration of war, written from the front lines of my own life. Chapter 1, The returns desk is where things end, but today I begin. The words were messy, the penmanship shaky, but they were mine. And for the first time since Christmas morning, I felt a flicker of something other than pain. It was small, and it was fierce. It was resolve. The diner was a study in grayscale, a world away from the garish fluorescence of the warehouse. It was 2:17 a.m., my third night in a row here. The vinyl booth was cracked, and the coffee tasted like burnt regrets, but it was my sanctuary. The girls were safe with my mother. The house was too loud with its silence, every creak of the floorboard a memory, every empty space on the wall where his things used to be a screaming accusation. So I fled. I came here, to this temple of the transient, with my notebook. The writing wasn't a novel anymore. It was an autopsy. A furious, sprawling, messy dissection of 12 years. I filled pages with things I never knew I remembered. The way he used to squeeze my hand 3 times for "I love you" when we crossed the street. The specific sound of his key in the lock at 6:15 p.m. The scent of his skin before the new cologne. I wrote it all down, not to preserve it but to purge it. To lay each memory on the slab and analyze its cause of death. My phone buzzed on the Formica table, skittering towards a sticky patch of syrup. Daniel, again. He'd moved from texts to voicemails. I'd listened to the first two. The first was all wounded pride. How could you do this? Burn my grandfather's watch? That was irreplaceable. The second was softer, manipulative. The girls asked for their goodnight kiss from Daddy. What was I supposed to tell them, Harper? That Mommy won't let me in the house. This new voicemail icon glowed like a malevolent eye. A part of me, the old Harper, the fixer, the returns desk manager, screamed to pick it up, to find a solution, to process this emotional return and get a refund on my pain. But the new Harper, the one who burned things, just took a slow sip of bitter coffee and clicked the pen. I'd started a new chapter. I called it The Lie of the Beige Cardigan. It was about the slow, insidious erosion of self that happens in a dying marriage. How you become the person who receives a beige cardigan because you've stopped being the woman who would ever ask for diamonds. I wrote about the returns desk, about the profound sadness of handling things that were once desired and were now discarded. I was, in essence, writing my own return slip. Item, one life. Reason, not as described. The diner door chimed, letting in a blast of cold night air. A man walked in, tall, looking as out of place as I felt. He wasn't a trucker or a night shift worker. He wore dark jeans and a worn leather jacket, and he had the slightly rumpled, intelligent look of a professor who had lost track of time. He slid into a booth a few down from mine, ordered a coffee, and pulled out a book. A real, thick paperback book. I tried not to stare, but in the reflection of the window, I watched him. He read with an intense focus, occasionally running a hand through his messy brown hair. He looked peaceful. It was a foreign concept. My phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text from Sarah, my one true friend from the warehouse. Heard Daniel was at the sorting facility today, making a scene, telling people you had a mental breakdown, that you're unstable. Jessica is playing the wounded, misunderstood soul. Be careful, the words hit me like a physical blow. The narrative was being rewritten without my consent. I was being cast as the hysterical woman, the crazy ex, while he and his miracle were the star-crossed lovers. The fury was instantaneous, a white-hot flame that dried the tears before they could even form. My hands trembled, not from sadness, but from a pure, unadulterated rage. I looked at my notebook. Then I looked at my phone. The voicemail icon seemed to taunt me. I opened the voice memo app. I didn't play his message. I recorded my own. My voice was low, steady, and colder than the diner's coffee. Daniel, I said, the recorder capturing every sharp syllable. Let's get a few things straight. You do not get to define my sanity. You do not get to gossip about me at our place of work. You want to talk about instability? Let's talk about the hotel receipt from Santa Barbara I found. Let's talk about the diamond earrings you bought for your miracle on Christmas. You want to play the victim? Fine. But know this, every time you open your mouth to lie about me, I will release one of these truths. I am no longer the returns desk. I am the auditor. And your account is deeply in the red. I stopped the recording. I didn't send it. I saved it. It was my ammunition, my shield. Just the act of speaking those words, of reclaiming the narrative, gave me a strength I hadn't felt in years. I went back to my notebook. The words flowed now, not as a purge, but as a construction. I was building a new foundation, word by word. I wrote about what I wanted. Not a man, not a revenge, but a life of intention. A life where I was the author, not a secondary character. I must have been muttering to myself, or perhaps the intensity of my scribbling was a spectacle, because I felt a presence. I looked up. It was the man from the other booth. He was standing a respectful distance away. "Sorry to bother you," he said, his voice a quiet, warm baritone that fit his appearance perfectly. I couldn't help but notice. You're either writing the next great American novel or plotting a murder. He gestured with his chin to my frantic handwriting and the pile of crumpled pages around me. A small, cautious smile played on his lips. The observation was so absurd, so unexpected, that a laugh bubbled up in my throat, a strange, rusty sound I barely recognized. It wasn't a happy laugh, but it was a real one. "A little of both, actually," I said, surprising myself with my candor. He nodded sagely. "The best novels usually are." He hesitated, then gestured to the empty seat opposite me. "The night is long. Mind if I join you? I'm Liam, by the way, and I promise I'm significantly less complicated than whatever you're working on." I looked at him. I looked at the empty booth, at my notebook, at the ghost of Daniel on my phone. This was a choice, a fork in the road. The old Harper would have smiled politely and said she was fine alone. The new Harper, the one who recorded voice memos and built foundations, saw a human being offering a moment of connection in the bleakest landscape of her life. I closed my notebook. "It's a free country," I said, my voice softer than I intended. "I'm Harper." As he slid into the booth, I didn't feel a spark. I didn't feel a romantic flutter. I felt a simple, profound sense of ceasefire. For the first time in days, the war inside me quieted, just for a moment. The architecture of my grief was still under construction, but maybe, just maybe, I was finally drawing up the plans for a window. Liam didn't ask me what was wrong. He didn't offer platitudes. He simply sat and talked about books. He was a copy editor for a small, academic press, a connoisseur of the Oxford comma, and a warrior against dangling modifiers. His current read, the thick paperback, was a dense treatise on post-colonial economic theory that he described with a self-deprecating grin as my personal form of insomnia cure. The normalcy of it was a lifeline. For an hour, the world shrank to the dimensions of our diner booth. We talked about the last great novels we'd read, the ones that felt like a friend had handed you a key to a secret room in your own mind. I told him I was trying to write, but it felt like trying to build a ship in a bottle while wearing mittens. "Everyone's first draft is terrible," he said, stirring his coffee. "The magic isn't in the first draft. It's in the refusal to throw it away. It's in the revision, the editing. That's where you find the truth under all the clumsy words and cliches." The revision. The word resonated deep within me. Wasn't that what I was trying to do? Revise my own life? Edit out the lies, the complacency, the beige cardigan? I wasn't erasing the past 12 years. They were part of the manuscript. But I was certainly cutting whole chapters and rewriting the ending. When the first hint of dawn painted the sky a bruised purple, we left the diner. He walked me to my car, an old Honda Civic that smelled of stale Cheerios and desperation. "It was nice to meet you, Harper," he said, his hands shoved into the pockets of his jacket. "The next great American novelist and murder plotter." "Likewise, Liam. Defender of the semicolon." He smiled, a genuine, crinkle-eyed thing that made him look younger. "If you ever need a quiet place to write or plot, there's a good bookstore downtown. The Quiet Page. I'm there most Saturdays, hiding in the history section. No pressure." I drove home in a daze. The house was still silent, but the silence felt different. It wasn't empty, it was waiting. I went straight to my bedroom, to the closet. I pushed aside my row of sensible sweaters and work slacks and reached for the box on the top shelf. It was dusty, sealed with years of neglect. Inside were my old journals from college, a few failed short stories, and a copy of To Kill a Mockingbird with a love letter from a boyfriend I could barely remember tucked inside. I was excavating. I was looking for the first draft of Harper, the one before the revisions of marriage and motherhood and financial anxiety had sanded down all the interesting edges. The following Saturday, after my shift, I found myself standing outside the Quiet Page. It was everything the name promised. A small, independent bookstore with creaky wooden floors, shelves that reached the ceiling, and the sacred, dusty smell of old paper and glue. My heart hammered against my ribs. This felt more intimidating than confronting Daniel. This was stepping back into a version of myself I'd declared obsolete. I pushed the door open. A little bell chimed. And there he was, in the history aisle, just as he'd said. He looked up from a thick volume on the Byzantine Empire, and his face broke into that same easy smile. He didn't wave me over. He just gave a slight, acknowledging nod, as if my presence was the most natural thing in the world. I wandered the aisles, my fingers trailing over the spines of countless worlds. I felt a reverence I hadn't felt in years. This was the antithesis of the Amazon warehouse. Here, every book was a wanted thing, a cherished thing. It wasn't about efficiency or returns, it was about love. I found myself in the fiction section, and a title caught my eye. The Unbearable Lightness of Being. I reached for it at the exact same moment as another hand. Our fingers brushed. I flinched back instinctively, murmuring an apology. The owner of the other hand was a woman about my age, with a warm, open face. "No, please, you take it," she said, her voice friendly. "It's a masterpiece. Are you a Kundera fan?" I'm trying to be again. I said, the honesty startling me. We fell into an easy conversation about books, about how hard it is to find time to read as an adult. Her name was Chloe, and she was a teacher. It was a simple, 5-minute interaction, but it felt monumental. It was a conversation that had no connection to Daniel, to the divorce, to the warehouse. It was a conversation with the world, a world I had been too busy or too broken to participate in. Later, Liam and I went to a small coffee shop nestled in the back of the store. Over cappuccinos, he told me about his divorce. It had been amicable, a slow drifting apart. There was no other woman, no burning of possessions, just a quiet, sad realization that their stories were heading in different directions. It sounds civilized, I said, a trace of bitterness I couldn't quite hide. Sometimes I wonder if a clean, dramatic break would have been easier, he mused. The slow fade leaves a lot of unanswered questions. At least you have your evidence. Your receipt, your narrative is clear even if it's painful. Your narrative is clear. No one had ever put it that way. They saw the drama, the pain, the chaos. He saw the structure. I'm trying to write a new one, I confessed, the words feeling both vulnerable and powerful. Good, he said simply. Just remember, every good story needs a compelling protagonist who wants something. What does Harper want? I looked around the bookstore at the towers of stories, at the quiet, focused readers, at this kind, calm man who saw syntax in my chaos. The answer came to me not as a grand declaration, but as a quiet certainty. She wants to stop being a supporting character in her own life. Liam lifted his coffee cup. To the protagonist, then? It was a mini-climax, not of action, but of identity. As I clinked my mug against his, I felt the tectonic plates of my soul shift. I wasn't just revising my life. I was changing the genre. It was no longer a tragedy. It was becoming a story of resilience. And maybe, just maybe, that was a far more interesting thing to be. The lawyer's office smelled of lemon-scented polish and quiet money. It was a different kind of sterility than the warehouse. This was a calculated, expensive cleanliness designed to soothe and intimidate simultaneously. Miss Flores, a woman in her 50s with a severe black bob and eyes that missed nothing, sat across from me, a yellow legal pad between us like a battlefield map. "Harper, we need to talk about assets," she said, her pen poised. "The house, the cars, joint accounts, retirement funds. We also need to establish a temporary custody arrangement for Lily and Rose." The words were so clinical, so final. Assets, custody. They were reducing the messy, bloody reality of my marriage into columns on a spreadsheet. My life was being itemized for liquidation. "He's already moving to devalue you," Miss Flores continued, her tone neutral. "His narrative, as you've reported, is one of your instability. The backyard incident is a centerpiece of his argument." A hot flush of shame crept up my neck. I had told her everything, the burning, the voice memo, the receipt. In this bright, proper room, my actions felt feral and foolish. "He cheated," I said, my voice tight. "He gave another woman diamonds." "Adultery is a factor, certainly," Miss Flores acknowledged. "But in the eyes of the court, especially in custody matters, perceived stability is paramount. We need to build a counter-narrative. You are not the unstable woman who burns things. You are the resilient mother and professional who was provoked by an extreme, ongoing betrayal and is now taking measured, responsible steps to secure her future and that of her children." She was revising me. Just like Liam talked about revising a manuscript, she was cutting out the chaotic parts and highlighting the strong protagonist. "What do I need to do?" I asked, my voice small. "First, the temporary custody. He's requesting 50-50. I advise we push for primary physical custody with him having visitation. To support this, we need evidence of your stability and his lapses." She slid a piece of paper across the desk. It was a list. It felt like a shopping list for my own vindication. Proof of steady employment and income, evidence of being the primary caregiver, school records, doctor's appointments, etc., character references, documentation of a stable, safe home environment for the children, any evidence of his irresponsible behavior or inappropriate influence on the children. Number 5 glared at me. The inappropriate influence. Jessica. That evening, Daniel was picking up the girls for his first overnight visit. I had spent hours cleaning the house, not for him, but for the judge who I felt was watching my every move. I made sure their favorite snacks were packed, their homework was done, their little suitcases were neat. I was performing stability, and I was exhausted by the performance. When his van pulled up, my stomach twisted. I saw Lily and Rose press their faces to the window, their little bodies vibrating with a confusing mix of excitement and anxiety. They missed their dad. That was the cruelest cut of all. They missed the man who had broken me. I opened the door before he could ring the bell. He stood there on my doorstep looking haggard. He'd lost weight. The new cologne was gone, he just smelled like sweat and stress. "Hey," he said, his eyes darting past me into the house, looking for changes, for evidence of my new life. "Their bags are by the door," I said, my voice flat. "They've eaten. Lily has a reading log to complete. Rose's allergy medicine is in the blue bag. Harper, we need to talk about this. Really talk, without all that." He gestured vaguely, encompassing the fire, the silence, the legal war. "My lawyer's number is on the fridge," I said. "You can direct all communication to her." His face hardened. "You're really doing this? You're going to use lawyers to talk for us, to fight me for the girls?" "You started the fight, Daniel," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper so the girls wouldn't hear. "You just didn't expect me to fight back." It was then that I saw it. Parked a little way down the street was a sleek, red coupe, and in the driver's seat, I could make out the silhouette of a woman with long hair. Jessica. He'd brought her. To my home, to the first pickup of our children. The rage was back, but this time it was cold, focused, and lethal. It was a tool. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I pulled my phone from my pocket, and making sure Daniel saw me, I took a clear, steady photograph of his van, my children getting into it, and the red coupe with its driver visible in the background. "What are you doing?" he asked, a note of panic in his voice. "Documentation," I said calmly, saving the photo to a new folder I'd created titled Custody, for the ledger. "It seems your new colleague is an enthusiastic participant in your co-parenting schedule. I'm sure the court will find that as relevant as I do." The color drained from his face. He hadn't expected this. He'd expected the emotional Harper, the one who burned sweaters. He wasn't prepared for the calculated Harper, the one who built cases. "It's not what you think," he stammered. "It never is," I replied. I knelt down and hugged my girls tightly, pouring all my love and fear and strength into that embrace. "I love you. Have fun with Daddy." I stood up, looked Daniel dead in the eye, and closed the door. I didn't slam it. I closed it with a firm, final click. Then I leaned against it, my legs trembling. I heard his van door slide shut, the engine start, and drive away. I listened to the sound of the red coupe following him. I walked to the kitchen, to the list from Miss Flores. I took a pen, and next to point number 5, I made a precise, satisfying checkmark. Any evidence of his irresponsible behavior or inappropriate influence on the children. Check. I was no longer just processing returns. I was processing my life. And I was finally in control of the ledger. The words had become an obsession. My little notebook was no longer enough. I'd bought a second-hand laptop, and it now sat open on my kitchen table every night after the girls were asleep, the glow of the screen a beacon in the quiet house. I wasn't just writing a novel anymore. I was writing my novel. A fictionalized, sharpened, and cathartically twisted version of my own collapse and reconstruction. My protagonist was Clara, a curator at a museum of broken artifacts. Her husband, a charismatic architect, was having an affair with a young intern at his firm. The story opened with Clara discovering a blueprint for a dream house she'd never seen, a house he was designing for this other woman. It was my hotel receipt, my diamond earrings, transformed into the language of my new world. I wrote in a fever dream. I gave Clara a rage I hadn't allowed myself. In one chapter, she took a hammer to a scale model of the dream house her husband had built. In another, she started secretly recataloguing the museum's exhibits, creating a new, subversive tour about the tyranny of beautiful things. She was me, but braver, more decisive. She was my revenge fantasy and my personal prophet. Liam had become my first reader. I'd send him chunks of text, my heart in my throat. His responses were never gushing praise, they were thoughtful, incisive. Clara's anger here is powerful, but is it masking her grief? Let's see a moment of vulnerability right after she smashes the model. Or, the metaphor of the museum is strong. Can we tie it back to her sense of self more directly? He was helping me revise not just the manuscript, but my own understanding of what had happened to me. Through Clara, I was processing my own story from a safe, creative distance. One Tuesday night, I was stuck on a crucial scene. Clara was supposed to have her moment of awakening, to decide to stop being a victim of her story and start being its author. But the words felt flat, cliched. She looked in the mirror and saw a new woman. It was a lie. I had looked in the mirror 1,000 times and still saw the same tired, betrayed face. Frustrated, I closed the laptop. The silence of the house pressed in on me. I could hear the faint, phantom echo of Daniel's laughter from a year ago, the ghost of a family movie night. The grief, which I had been successfully channeling into Clara, threatened to swallow me whole. I was failing. At writing, at moving on, at being the stable rock my girls needed. Driven by a need to do something, anything, tangible, I decided to tackle a long-ignored household task, building the new bookshelf for the girls' room. It had arrived in a flat, daunting box weeks ago, a promise I'd made to them before everything fell apart. I dragged the box into the living room, spilling out planks of particle board, bags of screws, and a sheet of instructions written in a language that seemed only vaguely related to English. For an hour, I struggled. I screwed piece A into piece B, only to find that piece C no longer fit. I misaligned the dowels. I hammered a panel in backwards and had to painfully pry it loose. My fingers ached, my forehead was beaded with sweat, and a screw-eye dropped rolled irretrievably under the sofa. I was surrounded by a chaotic jumble of wood and my own incompetence, a perfect metaphor for my life. I sank to the floor, surrounded by the pathetic skeleton of the bookshelf, and finally let the tears come. They weren't the hot, angry tears of betrayal, but the cold, hopeless tears of defeat. I couldn't even do this. I couldn't build a simple, stupid bookshelf. How could I possibly rebuild a life? My phone buzzed. It was Liam. "How's the writing going? Hit a wall?" I wiped my nose on my sleeve and typed back, my thumbs clumsy with despair. "No. Hit a bookshelf. Literally, I'm failing at basic furniture assembly, and writing, and everything." 3 dots appeared, then his reply. "Stay there, I'm on my way." 20 minutes later, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find him standing there, holding a paper bag from a hardware store and a determined look. "I come bearing tools and moral support," he said. He didn't take over. He knelt on the floor amidst the chaos, examined the hieroglyphic instructions, and simply said, "Okay. The problem with these things is that the diagrams are a lie. They show you the destination, but not the journey. Let's start by identifying all the pieces that look like they belong together. Forget the manual for a minute." So, we did. We sorted the wood. We laid out the screws by size. We talked about everything and nothing. About a frustrating author he was editing, about a funny thing Rose had said, about the best way to make grilled cheese. He told a ridiculously long, self-deprecating story about the time he tried to build a canoe in his apartment and got stuck in the bathroom for an hour. And as we talked, we built. He held pieces steady while I screwed them in. I read the instructions aloud while he figured out their cryptic meaning. We made mistakes, we laughed, we unscrewed and rescrewed. And slowly, impossibly, the chaotic pile of wood began to resemble a bookshelf. As we lifted the final shelf into place, securing it with the last screw, we stepped back. It stood there, solid and real. It wasn't perfect, it was a little wobbly and there was a small scratch on one side, but it was built. We had built it. I looked from the bookshelf to Liam, who was smiling, a smudge of dust on his cheek. And in that moment, the scene for Clara wrote itself in my head. It wasn't about looking in a mirror. It was about the quiet, triumphant moment after a long, frustrating struggle, when you look at something you built with your own hands, with patience and help, and realize that the wonky, imperfect thing before you is infinitely more beautiful and valuable than any perfect, store-bought dream. "That's it," I whispered. "What's it?" Liam asked. "Clara's moment," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "She doesn't just see a new woman, she builds something, and in the building, she realizes she's already become her." The mini-climax wasn't in the courtroom or a confrontation with Daniel. It was on my living room floor, surrounded by sawdust and the tangible proof of my own resilience. The protagonist of my story, both Clara and Harper, had finally learned how to read the instructions for her own life. And she had learned she didn't have to build it alone. The email arrived on a Tuesday, the same day the temporary custody hearing was scheduled. I was dressed in a stiff, unfamiliar blazer, my hands clenched around a cup of coffee I was too nervous to drink. Miss Flores had prepped me relentlessly. Calm, composed, and focused on the children's well-being, you are a rock, not a volcano. I was mentally rehearsing my lines when the notification popped up on my phone. The sender name made my heart stop. Prentice and Lyle Literary Agency. With trembling fingers, I opened it. Dear Miss Harper, thank you for submitting your query and the first 3 chapters of the Museum of Broken Things. We were captivated by the raw emotional power and the unique premise. The metaphor of the museum as a reflection of the protagonist's inner world is strikingly original. We would be very interested in reading the full manuscript at your earliest convenience. Sincerely, a leaner Vance literary agent. The world tilted. The noise of the kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator, the tick of the clock faded into a distant hum. They were captivated. They wanted the full manuscript. A real New York literary agent. This wasn't a daydream scribbled in a diner notebook. This was a door, a real, heavy, professional door cracking open. I read the email 5 times, then I screamed. A short, sharp, utterly undignified scream of pure, unadulterated joy. Lily and Rose came running into the kitchen, their eyes wide. "Mommy, are you okay?" Lily asked, clutching her stuffed rabbit. I dropped to my knees and pulled them into a crushing hug, laughing and crying at the same time. "I'm more than okay, baby. I'm possible." The hearing was an anticlimactic blur. Daniel sat on the other side of the courtroom, shooting me glances I couldn't decipher. His lawyer painted a picture of a fractured but repentant man. My lawyer presented me as a stable, devoted mother. The evidence of Jessica's presence at the first pickup was entered, and I watched Daniel's lawyer flinch. The judge, a weary-looking woman with kind eyes, granted me primary physical custody, with Daniel receiving generous, structured visitation. It was a victory, a solid, tangible victory, but it felt like a formality after the earthquake of that email. I called Liam from the courthouse steps, the California sun warm on my face. "I got it," I breathed into the phone, my voice shaking. "The agency, they want the full manuscript." There was a beat of silence on the other end, then a whoop of joy that was so unlike his usual calm demeanor it made me laugh. "Harper, that's incredible. This calls for a celebration, a proper one." "Okay," I said, feeling reckless and powerful. "But not dinner. Let's do something unplanned." His idea was Big Sur. He said he knew a spot, a turnout off the highway that wasn't on any tourist map. It was a 3-hour drive. It was insane. I had the girls, I had work the next day. The old Harper would have listed a dozen reasons why it was impossible. The new Harper said, "I'll have my mom keep the girls overnight. Pick me up in an hour." We drove south as the sun began its descent, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. We played terrible 80s music at full volume, and Liam, true to his randomized parameter, knew every single word to a profoundly cheesy power ballad. He sang along with zero shame, his voice off-key and full of joy, and I laughed until my sides hurt. It was the most free I had felt in years. We reached the spot just as the last sliver of sun dipped below the horizon. It was a small, rocky ledge overlooking the vast, roaring Pacific. The air was cold and smelled of salt and sage. The only light came from the brilliant blanket of stars overhead and the faint, silvery glow of the bioluminescent algae churning in the waves below. We sat on a blanket, shoulders touching, not speaking, just watching the celestial show. The immensity of it all, the ocean, the sky, the countless stars, should have made me feel small. Instead, it made me feel vast. My problems, my pain, Daniel's betrayal, it was all just a speck in this magnificent, chaotic universe. And my joy, this newfound hope, was a part of it too. "I finished it," I said softly, my voice barely a whisper against the roar of the ocean. "The full manuscript, last night." Liam turned to look at me, his face illuminated by starlight. And I sent it to a leaner Vance an hour before you picked me up." He didn't say anything. He just looked at me with an expression of such profound pride and admiration that it stole my breath. He leaned in slowly, giving me every opportunity to pull away. I didn't. His lips met mine, and it was nothing like the frantic, familiar kisses of a dying marriage. This was slow and gentle and full of promise. It tasted of sea salt and possibility, and the thrilling, terrifying first sentence of a new, unplanned chapter. When we pulled apart, he kept his forehead resting against mine. The protagonist, he whispered, just became a best-selling author. I smiled in the darkness. The mini-climax wasn't the kiss, as wonderful as it was. It was the realization that my life was no longer a story about being left behind. It was a story about being found. By myself, by my words, and maybe, just maybe, by someone who saw the universe in my eyes and didn't look away. The call came on a rainy Thursday, 3 weeks after the trip to Big Sur. The world outside my window was a watercolor of gray and green, and I was trying to focus on the tedious task of updating my household budget, a stark reminder that my warehouse salary was now the sole foundation of our future. When the unknown New York number flashed on the screen, my first instinct was panic. Was it about the girls? About the legal case? I answered with a hesitant, "Hello? Harper. This is Eleanor Vance from Prentice and Lyle." The air left my lungs. Her voice was exactly as I'd imagined it from her email, crisp, intelligent, and devoid of unnecessary warmth. This was a business call. "Eleanor." "Hello," I managed, my voice strangled. "I've finished The Museum of Broken Things," she said without preamble. "And I have to say, Harper, it's remarkable. The raw nerve you've managed to tap into, it's rare." The scene where Clara recatalogues the domestic bliss exhibit to show the cracks in the porcelain. Chilling. And the emotional arc from devastation to self-reclamation is powerfully rendered. My hand was trembling so violently I had to put the phone on speaker and set it down on the table. I felt like I was floating, watching this scene happen to someone else. "Thank you," I whispered. "That means more than I can say." "Now, let's talk about the work," she continued, and her tone shifted into something even more focused. "The manuscript is a diamond, but it's rough. The middle sags. Clara's rage is potent, but it becomes repetitive. We need to vary her emotional palette. And the ending? It's a bit too neat, don't you think? Life isn't a romance novel. The true victory isn't finding a new man, it's building a new life, with or without one." Her critique was like a surgeon's scalpel, precise, sharp, and absolutely necessary. She wasn't tearing me down. She was building me up, demanding the best version of the story. My story. "I understand," I said, my writer's mind already racing, seeing the sagging middle, the too tidy ending. She was right. "I want to represent you, Harper," Eleanor said, and the world stopped. "I believe in this book. I believe it can find a home at a major house, but we need to revise. Are you prepared to do that? It will be intense. It will require you to open old wounds and examine them under a harsher light." Yes, the word was a fire in my chest. Yes, I am prepared. "Excellent. I'll send over my detailed editorial letter. We have work to do." When the call ended, I sat in the silent kitchen for a long time, listening to the rain and the echo of her words in the empty house. "I want to represent you." It was real. It was happening. I had built a ship in a bottle, and a professional captain had just agreed to sail it. The timing was almost comical. Just as this new, dazzling future was crystallizing, the past decided to pay one last, draining visit. The divorce settlement arrived for my final review. Miss Flores had negotiated fiercely. I would keep the house, bought out his share with a portion of my retirement fund he was forced to relinquish. There was child support, spousal support for a limited period to allow me to get on my feet. It was a good deal, a victorious deal. But reading the cold, legal language that formally ended my marriage was like reading my own autopsy report. The party of the first part, the party of the second part. We were no longer Harper and Daniel. We were parties in a dissolved contract. Daniel was scheduled to come that evening to collect the final boxes of his things, the mundane leftovers I hadn't burned. Old tax records, his collection of vintage maps, some childhood memorabilia I didn't have the heart to destroy. I stacked them neatly by the garage door, a pathetic little monument to a dead empire. When he arrived, he looked older. The swagger was gone, replaced by a permanent slump of defeat. He loaded the boxes into his van in silence. The rain had softened to a drizzle. He stood by his driver's side door, looking at me standing on the porch, arms crossed against the chill. "I heard," he said, his voice flat. "Jessica saw it on some industry website. Your book. You got an agent." The news of my success had traveled through the Amazon gossip vine and reached him. There was no congratulations in his tone. It was a statement of fact, laced with a bewildered resentment. "Yeah," I said, "I did." He shook his head, a bitter, confused smile on his face. I never saw it. The writing, you were always just, Harper, my wife. The girl's mom." The finality in his words was the true end of our story. He had never seen the woman dreaming of diamonds, and he had never seen the novelist dreaming of worlds. He had only seen the function I served in his life. "And now," I said, my voice clear and steady in the damp air, "I'm just Harper." He got in his van and drove away. I watched his taillights disappear down the street and I felt nothing, no rage, no grief, no victory. Just a quiet, profound closure. I walked back into the house. It was still empty, but the echo was gone. The silence was no longer the silence of absence, but the silence of a blank page. I opened my laptop, pulled up Eliner's editorial letter, and began to read. The work was waiting. My life was waiting. The protagonist had finally, completely, reclaimed her narrative. The revision process for the novel was a peculiar form of torture. Eliner's editorial letter was 12 pages long, a masterclass in literary dissection that left me feeling both enlightened and utterly dismantled. She was right about everything. The middle did sag. Clara's rage was a monolith, leaving no room for the complex, weary sadness that had been my own constant companion. And the ending, where Clara walked off into the sunset with a charming bookstore owner, was a lie. A beautiful, satisfying lie, but a lie nonetheless. "The victory isn't the new man," Eliner had said over the phone, her voice crackling with the same New York efficiency. "The victory is the woman who no longer needs a man to validate her existence. The victory is the finished museum, curated by her for her. The man can be a pleasant addition to the new wing, but he is not the foundation." So, I gutted it. I worked every night after the girls were asleep, the click-clack of the keyboard a counterpoint to the settling sounds of the house that was now indisputably mine. I tore apart chapters, wrote new ones where Clara sat alone in her newly curated museum, not with a sense of triumph, but with a quiet, daunting peace. It was harder than writing the first draft. It was surgery on my own soul. In the midst of this creative upheaval, Liam was a steady, patient presence. He brought me coffee, listened to me rant about character motivation, and celebrated small breakthroughs with a quiet, "I knew you could do it." Our relationship was a slow, gentle burn. We went on hikes with the girls, who adored him for his ability to name every cloud formation and his bottomless patience for their endless, why questions. We had lazy Sunday mornings making pancakes, and he did, in fact, know every line from The Breakfast Club, reciting them with a solemnity usually reserved for Shakespeare. It felt like a dream, a beautiful, peaceful dream after a long nightmare, and that was precisely what terrified me. My trust had been annihilated. The blueprint for happiness I had once believed in had been revealed as a fraudulent document. So my subconscious, in its infinite, twisted wisdom, decided to stress test this new reality. It happened at a dinner party. Liam's friend, Ben, and his wife, Maria, were hosting. It was a casual, warm affair, filled with laughter and the clinking of wine glasses. I was feeling more myself than I had in years, talking about my book, about the girls, feeling like a person in my own right, not just an appendage or a victim. Then Ben, slightly tipsy and full of bonhomie, clapped Liam on the shoulder. "And to think, we all thought you'd become a permanent hermit after the whole Sandra debacle. So glad you're back in the land of the living, man." The name, Sandra, hung in the air like a shard of ice. Liam's face tightened almost imperceptibly. He'd told me about his divorce, the slow, sad fade. He had never mentioned a name. He had never called it a debacle. I felt the floor tilt. The warm, golden glow of the evening vanished, replaced by the cold, familiar fluorescence of suspicion. Debacle. What did that mean? Was there another woman? Was his story, his calm, amicable separation, also a lie? My mind, now a finely tuned instrument for detecting falsehoods, went into overdrive. The cozy narrative I'd built, two wounded souls healing together, suddenly seemed flimsy, naive. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. I smiled, I nodded, I made polite conversation, but I was a ghost at the feast. On the drive home, the silence in the car was thick and heavy. "Harper," Liam finally said, his voice quiet. "You've been quiet since we left Ben's." "Sandra," I said, the name a bullet in the quiet car. He let out a long, slow breath. I see. You never told me her name. You never said it was a debacle. I didn't think it was relevant, he said, his hands tight on the steering wheel. It's in the past. The past has a funny way of not staying there, I replied, my voice sharper than I intended. What happened? Was there someone else? He was silent for a moment too long. It wasn't like your situation, Harper. Just tell me. He pulled the car over to a scenic overlook, the lights of the city sprawling below us like a fallen galaxy. He didn't look at me. Sandra didn't cheat, he said, his voice low. I didn't cheat, we just stopped, but the debacle Ben was referring to, after we decided to split, she started seeing someone, very quickly, a colleague. It felt like a gut punch, even though we were already over. It made a mockery of all our years of trying. That's what Ben meant, my pathetic, moping phase. I processed this. It wasn't infidelity, it was grief. A different kind of betrayal, but a betrayal nonetheless. The parallel was too close for comfort, the ghost of a colleague. And you never thought to tell me this? I asked, the hurt bubbling to the surface. You knew what I went through. You knew the trigger that word would be. I didn't tell you, he said, finally turning to look at me, his eyes full of a pained honesty, because it was my shame. My inability to handle the end with the grace I pretended to have. I wanted to be the stable one for you, the one who had his shit together. I didn't want you to see that I was just as broken, that I had my own messy, undignified scars. The mini-climax wasn't a shout, it was a surrender. His confession, his vulnerability. He wasn't the perfectly healed, stoic hero. He was a man, flawed and scarred, who had tried to hide his wounds to be strong for me. And in that moment, the stress test yielded its result. The foundation didn't crack, it held. I reached out and took his hand. Don't do that, I whispered. Don't hide your scars from me. I don't need a hero, Liam. I need a partner. And partners get to be a mess sometimes. The relief that washed over his face was palpable. He brought my hand to his lips and kissed my knuckles, a simple, tender gesture that held more meaning than any grand declaration. Okay, he said, his voice rough with emotion. No more hiding. We drove the rest of the way home in a comfortable silence. The fear was still there, a faint echo in the chambers of my heart, but it was no longer in control. I had faced a potential ghost from his past, and instead of finding a lie, I had found a deeper truth. The museum of my heart had a new exhibit, not of broken things, but of something fragile, real, and meticulously, courageously being built. And this time, the blueprint was honest. The email from a leaner Vance had a new, electric quality to it. The subject line was a single, life-altering word: offer. Prentice and Lyle had orchestrated a four-way auction for the Museum of Broken Things. The numbers they were discussing on the phone made my warehouse worker mind short-circuit. It was more money than I would have made in 5 years of processing returns. It was freedom. It was a future I had built with my own 2 hands, typed out on a second-hand laptop. When the final offer came in from a prestigious publishing house, it was accompanied by an editorial vision that aligned perfectly with mine. They saw Clara not as a jilted woman, but as a phoenix. They saw the museum not as a mausoleum, but as a testament to resilience. I signed the contract. I was a professionally contracted author. The first thing I did, after the stunned tears and the frantic calls to my mother and Liam, was to quit my job. I gave Mark 2 weeks' notice, and his weary face broke into the widest grin I'd ever seen. I always knew you were meant for more than this, Harper, he said, pulling me into a brief paternal hug. Now go write something beautiful. Leaving the warehouse for the last time felt like shedding a skin. The constant hum, the fluorescent lights, the conveyor belt of regret, it was no longer my world. I walked out into the sunlight, the weight of the returns desk finally lifted from my shoulders. With the advance, a new world of possibilities opened up. The old house was filled with too many ghosts, too many echoes of a life that was no longer mine. It was time for a new blueprint. Liam and I started looking, and we found it. A modern, airy house in a quieter part of the same state, with a big backyard for the girls and a sun-drenched room that would be my office. It was a clean slate, a structure with no history, waiting for us to write our own. The day we moved in was chaos, but it was a joyful chaos. Lily and Rose ran through the empty rooms, their laughter echoing off the bare walls, claiming their new territories. Liam and I stood in the living room, surrounded by towers of boxes, and he pulled me into a hug. Our first official joint project, he said, nodding at the chaos. Bigger than a bookshelf. Much bigger, I agreed, leaning into him. And the instructions are even worse. We decided our first official act, our foundational ritual, would be to build the dining table. Not just any table, but a large, solid oak one, ordered as a flat-pack kit that promised easy assembly in bold, lying letters. It was our chosen joint activity, amplified to a symbolic scale. We weren't just building furniture, we were building the heart of our new home. We laid out all the pieces in the empty dining room, the scent of fresh wood and promise filling the air. The instructions were, as predicted, a comical disaster of ambiguous diagrams and poorly translated English. Step 4. Attach the leg to the undercarriage using the provided dowels, ensuring a firm connection, Liam read aloud, frowning at a drawing that looked more like an abstract octopus than a table. The what now? I asked, holding up a curiously shaped piece of wood. Is this the undercarriage or a modern art sculpture? We fumbled. We laughed. We screwed piece G into piece H only to realize it was meant for piece K. At one point, we had the entire tabletop upside down and didn't realize it until we tried to attach the legs and found them pointing skyward. We collapsed into helpless laughter, sitting on the floor amidst the sawdust and misassembled wood. It was nothing like the tense, silent building of the past. This was a shared, ridiculous adventure. And through it all, Liam kept up a running commentary in the form of quotes from the worst 80s movies he could remember. As we struggled to lift the heavy tabletop, he grunted, "I feel like Swayze in Roadhouse, but with more splinters and less philosophical wisdom about bars." When we finally, miraculously, got the last leg secured and stood the table upright, it was perfect. It was solid, it was beautiful, it was ours. We had built it together, with patience, laughter, and a complete disregard for the manufacturer's lies. That night, we had our first meal at the new table. Just pizza on paper plates, but it felt like a feast. Lily and Rose chattered excitedly about their new rooms, their new school. Liam told a story about a particularly bad movie from 1987, and I laughed so hard I snorted soda. I looked around the table, at my daughter's bright, happy faces, at this good, kind man who loved my messy, complicated self, at the solid table we had built with our own hands, and I felt a peace so profound it was almost dizzying. This was the mini-climax, the quiet, powerful culmination of all the pain and struggle. It wasn't a dramatic confrontation or a public victory. It was a simple pizza dinner at a self-built table in a house that was ours. The museum of broken things was far behind me. I was no longer a curator of pain. I was an architect of joy. The new blueprint was complete, and we were already living in it. The book launch party for the Museum of Broken Things was held in the very bookstore where Liam and I had first properly talked, the Quiet Page. The owner, a friend of Liam's, had closed the shop for the evening, and it was now filled with the warm, murmuring energy of friends. A few colleagues from my old life, my mother beaming with pride, and even Miss Flores, who had a rare, triumphant smile on her face. I stood at a small podium, my hands steady, my heart full. The twins, Lily and Rose, now a year older and buzzing with excitement, sat in the front row next to Liam, who gave me a slow, reassuring nod. In the back, I noticed Mark from the warehouse, holding a copy of my book like a trophy. A year ago, I had been burning my past in a backyard fire pit. Now, I was about to read from the story that had risen from those ashes. "Thank you all for coming," I began, my voice clear and strong in the hushed room. A little over a year ago, my life felt like a returns desk, a place where dreams and promises ended up, discarded and unwanted. I thought I was the manager of that desk, but I had really become one of its items. Then, through a series of painful and unexpected events, I was forced to return myself, to ask for a refund on a life that was not as described. A sympathetic, knowing laugh rippled through the crowd. I started writing to make sense of the chaos. I created Clara, a museum curator, because I needed to believe that the broken artifacts of a life could be reassembled into something with new meaning, new beauty. What I didn't expect was that through writing her story, I would curate my own. This book isn't just a novel, it's the map of my own reconstruction, and it led me here. I looked directly at Liam and my daughters, to a new house built on a foundation of honesty and laughter, to a career born from my own darkest moments. and to a family that is not defined by blood alone, but by chosen love, mutual respect, and the shared joy of building a bookshelf, a table, and a future together. I read the passage where Clara, alone in her museum after the final visitors have left, finally feels not loneliness, but a profound sense of ownership. She wasn't waiting for someone to walk through the door and complete the exhibit. She was the exhibit, and it was whole. After the reading, as people lined up for me to sign their books, I saw a familiar, hesitant figure at the end of the line. Daniel. He held a copy of the book, his expression a complex mix of pride, regret, and awe. The girls saw him and ran over, and he hugged them tightly, the picture of a loving father. The custody arrangement was working. He was a part of their lives, but no longer a specter in mine. When he finally reached me, he placed the book on the table. "Hi, Harper." "Daniel," I said, my tone neutral, polite. "I read it," he said quietly. "It's incredible and brutal. I see myself in the architect, and I deserve it." I didn't confirm or deny, I simply nodded. "I'm sorry," he said, and for the first time, it felt like a real apology, stripped of justification and self-pity. Not just for what I did, but for who I became, for not seeing you. "Thank you," I said, and I meant it. The apology no longer had the power to heal me, because I had already healed myself. But it had the power to grant him some peace, and that I could afford to give. I signed the title page for him, for Daniel, wishing you new blueprints. I didn't sign it with love, but I signed it without malice. It was the final release. The party wound down. Goodbyes were said, hugs were exchanged. Soon, it was just Liam, the girls, and me, surrounded by the peaceful, book-scented silence. "Can we go home, Mom?" Rose asked, yawning and leaning against Liam's leg. Home, the word had never sounded so sweet. "Yes, baby," I said, gathering my things. "Let's go home." We drove back to our new house, the one with the big backyard and the sun-drenched office. The girls, exhausted from the excitement, fell asleep in the back seat. Liam reached across the console and took my hand, lacing his fingers through mine. "I'm so proud of you," he said softly. Back at the house, we carried the sleeping girls to their beds, tucking them in amid the stuffed animals and new dreams. We stood in the hallway, looking in at them for a moment, two little souls safe and loved in the home we had built. Later, I stood in the doorway of my office. On the wall above my desk, I had hung a single, framed item. It wasn't my book cover or a bestseller list. It was the first page of my original, handwritten manuscript from the diner, the paper coffee-stained and worn, the words barely legible. Chapter 1, The Returns Desk is where things end, but today I begin. I had kept my promise to myself. I felt Liam's presence behind me. He wrapped his arms around my waist, resting his chin on my shoulder. "From the returns desk to the New York Times list," he murmured. "Not a bad arc." "It's not the end of the story," I said, leaning back into his embrace, looking at the evidence of my journey. "It's the end of the first book." The Museum of Broken Things was closed. In its place stood a living, breathing home, a testament to the art of rebuilding. The story of the upgrade was complete. Harper, the returns desk clerk, was gone. In her place was Harper, the author of her own life, and she was just getting started.